Telstra Museum in Brisbane. Fundamentally what you'll see today is contained in 4 different areas, dealing both with the, as you say, telephones that we all know. We've got a switchboard room here, which of course associated with telephones. Of course they've got a Morse code area and the manual telegraph. And we've got a room which will show you mechanical telegraph, in other words, that replaced the Morse code. So fundamentally that's what we have, as well as the cupboards of memorabilia, you might say, and things of the old days. So feel free to look around as well. But in each of these rooms, one of us, my name's Rod, a volunteer here, one of the volunteers will guide you, so to speak, and the main idea is that we can give you hands-on. You know, some people don't want to put hands on, you might bite, but generally speaking, the equipment is sufficient working so that you can see how the device works. And that's what we'll work on. Brisbane here, after Mr. Bell patented his telephone in 1876, within 4 years, Brisbane had a telephone system. And one of the first customers, believe it or not, was Castlemaine Brewery. They had their own telephone system prior to, and then when the city developed one, so they connected. So with every telephone system, you need a directory. I'm happy to show you 1980 directory, 1880 rather, for Brisbane. And that is the sum total of the connected people. The big man in town was the colonial secretary. He got number one. Yes. He was number one.
The brewery, didn't it?
Yes. Would you keep that in mind? Yes. Yeah. The Apollo Candle Works, I fear, has gone to the wall. But most of it, of course, is government or businesses. Mr. Forth must have been a man of substance. And interestingly, you'll find here that the police barracks didn't have a number but had the letter H, which I, and only I, interpret as when you picked up the phone and hollered help, we'll give you a hug. You get yourself a police. Yes, and that helpline, exactly.
Well, that sounds a good story anyway.
Yes, yeah, well, I'm sticking with it. The thing is, of course, as I said, within 4 years of the phone being a phone, in spite of the fact that you couldn't fly over and things like that, the only communication was you got on a boat and spent months sort of going back and forwards, or you telegraphed, because that was it until then. Telegraph was the main communication medium. So I thought it was rather amazing. Melbourne beat us by months for the first exchange, but Brisbane, as I say, was in the same year, about September. So there we have it, a far cry from today's telephone directory. Yes. And of course with switchboards, and that was of course the medium by which we connected telephones, came the operator who could do this job, you see. And when they started in Melbourne, and there's a couple of pictures or drawings of ladies in bustles and hair up, standing up doing this job, which fortunately did change. But ladies of those days proved very efficient, albeit they weren't allowed to smile. This one in the middle, commonly known as the dragon,
Smile
no nonsense allowed, as you can see. And it was a very serious time too with photography. I think you didn't smile, and here's some gentlemen who also declined to smile, bent with chairs. And you can see the switchboards along there.
That's a large switchboard.
Yes, and this would have been a 24-hour type thing when women didn't work at the night shift, you see, so they employed men. But as I think all the gentlemen here at least will agree, it's much nicer to be asked number please with a female voice. Yes, and preferably in this day and age, not with an Indian.
That bit's being deleted from the movie, I'll take it.
Perhaps they're getting some abusive phone calls. That's right.
Right, how do they work? Well, sir, you want to make a phone call? If your phone is this one, and you'll notice that these phones, of course, don't have dials, they had to create some sort of electricity to tell the switchboard that, in fact, they wanted help. So would you be good enough to just don't pick up the handset, but just turn the handle, if you will? Well, your own work. What happened there was the electricity. Can you see from up the back there?
Just didn't quite see that one yet.
If we could.
Oh, yeah,
I'll turn the noise off, but in fact, cause that shutter to fall. And of course the number is number 5. And the operating, you've done this before, haven't you? Slept this one.
I knew I came for some reason.
To answer the call, we would use the answer chord of this pair. It could be any pair, but that pair. So if you put that into hole number 5,
Yes, and I haven't got a pair of glasses on.
I can lend you mine, but I don't need your help. And if you push the key away from you, push it up the phone, please.
Oh,
And now, in a cultured voice, number please.
Number, please.
Number 2.
Oh, he wants to chat, you see.
He wants to
Yes,
chat,
yes,
does
okay. So you're obliged then to take the call cord, this
Yes.
one here, I'll hold that fancy for you if you like, into number 2.
2.
Yes, and if you pull this towards you,
Okay.
you might press that little button, just pull it right. Yeah. I think that's your phone over there, would you mind? Would you listen on? Yeah.
Hello.
You said, go ahead.
George?
Oh, how are you, Nick?
They overrode the operator. That's
Where are you
not
today?
nice. Go ahead, said the operator, didn't she?
Where?
That's interesting. They've got phones there, obviously, too.
Yeah, quite runs at work.
Well-
Now if you look at the digital things.
We get school children doing this and they say, can I have a pizza or something like that?
How long did that stay in for? How many years? How long did this stay in for? Into the 30s?
Oh, well, past.
Because I seem to remember it. I
Well,
gotta say,
you're
I remember
okay.
going to a public auction and winding the hand.
Yes,
yeah, and
yes,
asking
oh yes. Well, we
exchange
didn't
and say what
divest
much
ourselves
you
of that until the 80s, 70s, 80s, in regional areas.
want. Yeah.
Bit
Yes,
easier to
okay,
work for
thank you.
them.
Thank you.
Easier to work than
Thanks
this
for
place,
that.
Okay.
Yes, so the whole system was of a person, and let's face it, persons much better than microprocessors. The operator was able to do whatever was required, or, and wonderfully, give advice over the phone. For instance, you know, I'm ringing up, I'm looking for Joe Blow. Oh, he said, usually in provincial towns, he said he'd be down at the other fellow's place, I'll put you through. And call forward, this sort of thing, you know. So those things were quite successful. And certainly it flourished. And if I can show you the one that was in Albion, this exchange in 1926, you can see, albeit it looks like a shearing shed with those things up, but you find switchboards on that side and on that side, and the dragon sat in the middle.
Oh,
The
okay.
supervisor kept an eye on these persons, you see.
See that there was no frivolity.
That's right, or ringing up the boyfriend or something of that nature. But that was fundamentally the layout where you had the boards on either side and you had the supervisor.
Standing there, is that there?
It could be the sheet of craft.
Yes.
That's us.
See, I did something wrong. I smiled and I should have had a serious battle.
We've got the same phone number we got in 1957.
Well,
We've got it. Yeah.
good.
It was MX, same day.
Yes.
And it was 269. There was a couple of different changes in the prefix.
There was, wasn't there?
It was 269 and then there was 3269. Started off with MX, if I remember rightly. And 2028. Yeah. So we still got it. We probably have it for the next
Great system.
20 years.
I can honestly say my parents never ever had a phone.
No, we never
Until they
had
went up to
one.
Coolum Beach.
We never had one.
Two fruit cans on the street.
Okay, well let's have a bit of nostalgia. I'll move over this way if I can, if you folks would like to. What grew, of course, was the telephone system, and I can't quote the date, but eventually the telephone lines connected the main cities, and hence we experienced for the first time trunk line calls. Now let's zap forward to around World War II and just after, you know, when you would want to bring someone in Sydney, you dial a number here in Brisbane, and the operator would say, number please, you say Sydney 2468. Oh, right, it's booked, we'll call you back. And then you'd sit by the radio listening to Martin's Corner or something of that nature, and the phone would ring. Ah, your call to Sydney is connected, go ahead. Right. The moment she said go ahead, she'd start one of these things. These are the clocks. Now, your call would be noted on a piece of paper of that style, the number calling, the number called, the time and everything, and this little clock would tick on merrily until it got down towards 3 when it would make one little ding, and she'd have that clock associated with your call. So, hearing the ding, she would come across and say the fatal words, 3 minutes, are you extending? And then you had to do this little mental exercise very quickly. Have I said everything? Do I need to? Or do I pay for another 3 minutes? Because you will recall, you had no option. Even if you said, I'll be home at 6 o'clock, see you, you paid for 3 minutes. So the expense of a trunk line call was quite significant, not only from that, but by today's standards, it was horrendously there. Whereas now you can get on after hours and chat for hours on the cost of $2 or something. But these were the phones that, the clocks that did the timing. And if you elected to go on, then it would run around to 6, and the same thing would happen again. So you could make use of it. So as you can see, there are varieties of clocks, but fundamentally they all do the same thing.
They work on a public phone as well, like phone box?
You did have to put, yes, you would have. Yeah, I can't say I've been to see the connection, but fundamentally it would be the same thing. Which, of course, brings us to another subject, and that's when did we transfer, as you asked before, from turning handles? Well, the city here in Brisbane in 1926 was the first installation of an automatic telephone system, and these venerable gentlemen up there on the wall, looking like an orchestra or a football team, they were responsible for the installation over at South Brisbane. And of course, automatic phones did in fact revolutionise the methodology, because you didn't have to depend on the operator being there. Now, I'll just say over in that corner, if you don't mind. I'd like to show you basically the principle of the telephone system automatic. And it was called step by step, because as you operated the dial, so the equipment read the digits that you sent in. So to demonstrate, I pick up the phone, I dial 7, and you'll hear the count. 6, 5. So it's absorbed those numbers, you see, and in turn, it's rung the bell over here. So what this effectively did was you generated the number and it read electrical pulses depending on which number you dialed. And a system such as this, with a 3-digit number, could accommodate up to 1,000 telephones with that system. Now, the thing was, when you made the phone call, you occupied that equipment, which meant you had to have rather a large amount of equipment to be able to contain everybody making phone calls. Except when 4BC or somebody like that had one of those little sojourns where they said, now, if you know the answer to the next question, dial this number. And then there'd be telephone exchanges dotted around Brisbane, and we, the technical staff, would be quietly listening to it, do a few of these things too. And then suddenly all hell broke loose. Everything was going up and tearing around, you see. And then there was silence, and then people listening to the radio would hear, oh, Mrs. B of so-and-so is one. Darn, they'd all hang up and it all crashed down again. So if you can imagine this, about, I don't know, 500 times going all together, and then there's quiet. That's the radio station, and then everyone would hang up and it'd do that. And then you get this effect. Now, it was times like that the exchange was overloaded, because they never have equipment to have everybody ringing up at once, but you'd get busy tone if you weren't quick enough and all that.
The first couple that we did in.
Yes, that's right, yes. And while we're on that subject, you heard the bell ring and things like that. We had to generate those noises, and this is a small example of what you do. As I say to the children, what happens when you make a phone call? I dial a number. No, what's the first thing? I pick up the handset. What do you hear? And of course, that machine is constantly generating these sounds, so that you get that. You dial the number, and then hopefully you hear something to that effect. They vary these days, but fundamentally that was the thing. If perhaps the person at the other end is on the phone, then you've got the familiar beep, beep, beep. And if it didn't work at all, which we call NU tone. These tones have varied significantly these days. And there are sometimes you've got to sort of take a deep breath and think, is that exactly okay? Or is it getting me through, particularly? So when you got into a major exchange, this weighed 3 tonne and sat on a rail and generated all these. It rings the bell at the other end and generates those. these little contacts at the end here are opening and closing, which effectively gives you the ringtone broken like that, you see. So, and incidentally, when you hear that, as you realise now, that's not the bell at the other end. It's merely reassuring you that the bell at the other end is ringing.
Oh, okay.
Now you get the recorded voice.
Yeah.
Do you want this or do you want that? There's one for this.
Yeah,
three for
this
this,
is a
three for
recording.
four for
You
that.
dial the wrong number. Yeah. So that's what we've got in the way of step by step. And as time went on, exchanges changed, and this small one on the wall here, a different kettle of fish all together, nice and quiet. Where are we? Oh, there's it. And it rings the bell. I don't know whether you, it's hard to see, but this little device, this will take the digits in. This is connecting, cross-connecting, and it's called a crossbar switch by the physical appearance of the device. And if you're into matrix and that, you know, you get one from this side, one from that side, you make a contact at that point. And that's fundamentally what that does. The numbers come in over here, and it just connects it. So this was the precursor to logic as we know it today, the PCs. This was wired logic. It worked quite well. It was a lot faster than these, and you could do various things that you couldn't do with this older style.
And what stage, what year did that sort of thing come in?
Crossbar came in the late 50s, 60s was when it really started to take off, crossbar. And as I say, it gave more flexibility. Now, strangely, as it got into the 80s, they started to drive that equipment with computers, so that instead of wired logic, you could talk to a computer and say, I want my number extended to here and things like that. But today, fundamentally, all we've got are computers. All this has disappeared. That big building over there in the precinct, it was full of this equipment earlier. I'll show you the sort of one bay of that equipment, as you can see, and then bay after bay to contain things. And then it went from there to that equipment, which really didn't take up much less space. And now, if you go in there, there's virtually nothing to see. There are cabinets down the far end with a hum that is the cooling fans on the computers, and that's where the connection is.
And that area over there, would that service how many suburbs, say?
That's a good question. We normally talk about the number of lines in an exchange. A big one's 10,000 or more lines, and there were lesser ones, and this was a fairly central one. So I imagine it was in the order of that, 10,000 lines.
When it went over, they'd have to open another.
Well, yes, that's right. Satellite exchanges, you see. And you had one at Lutwich, and then they put one in at Chermside as the growth went out and things of this nature. So it was depending largely on the demographics. And it was Ken that said it, wasn't it? You had that phone from day one.
Yeah.
Now, of course, in those days you could say it was MX or MY and say, I don't know where that is. Not anymore. People have phone numbers.
We've shifted twice too.
And
It's our third house and we're still
That's great.
in the same area.
That's right. I remember the first one when I was at the Ida Grasshopper, and it was MY, which was out of Lutwich, I think.
Yeah. So yeah,
And then it went to LX out there at Chermside. So, you know, switchboards are part of the folklore, if we can call it that, and the operators, particularly in the country, were responsible in many ways to, I won't say the gossip, but the information flow. And for those of you who have been out west, you know about party lines?
No,
where,
tell us about it. I don't understand how they can all listen in.
Well, what we were bound with, of course, was these sheep stations, cattle properties, that we just didn't have the
capacity.
we didn't want to provide the lines. So the farmers were invited to build their own telephone lines. And from a small town, a cable would go out to a particular pole, and from that point on, instead of having two wires, there was just one wire. Now this was usually number 8 galvanised fencing wire, and it meandered over hills and dales for 10, 50, up to 100 kilometres, and as it passed through, so you'd put a wire around it figuratively and run it into the farmhouse, and then the other wire from the phone would go into a stake in the ground, preferably under the tank stand, which always dripped and kept the connection working very well, you see. So you could come up with 4, 5, 6, 7 telephones hanging off this one fencing wire, meandering through trees, round bends, along fences sometimes, and then it'd come to the gate, so they had to put a big pole up and cross them down. And so it would go on. Now this was a partly privately erected line.
Yeah.
And when it broke, did they solder it together? Not on Nelly, they just tied it with a figure 8 knot. And they go. Now, the thing was, you see, that they used the earth to bring the electricity back to the pole, and provided that earth connection was kept moist and effective, then this worked rather effectively. In times of rain and floods, and it might sag down in the creek, things got a bit difficult. But what you do if you're right at the end is grind madly on the phone and see if somebody answers. And then if they're further down the line, they could grind madly on the phone and see if they can get somebody in. And they do say, I'll say 1, 2, 3 and all wind together sort of thing, which electrically speaking may or may not have worked. But the funny part about it was, if you could get the shutter drop at the exchange, quite often the voice worked quite well. Even though it was underwater in the creek and things of that nature. And of course, the big question was, if you're living out there and your name's Jones, and this is line 3, you might be 3D, and next door will be 3K, because they had to, when they were making the call on the party line, discern who the call was for, which meant the first person to pick up the phone, the rest would follow. So if you wanted to ring 3D, the operator would send the Morse code on the bells of D, which is da-did-it from memory.
Right.
So in the story of the people on the farm, we're long and too short. Right? So the bell would go ring, 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 and everybody's ears would be
tuned to it,
in every farmhouse would listen. Oh, that's the Browns down the road. You see, the daughter went in to have a baby. And so it worked, which really, as a community, expanded that sort of flow. And the nice thing was, if you wanted to ring the Browns and you were on the code, you dialed their number, you rang their number, and that answer, and you got that as a free call. Party line.
Yeah.
So, part of our history. Well,
One quick question.
Yes.
In our young days, we used to pick up the receiver and jiggle that thing.
Yes.
You can't do that anymore.
I
Can you?
hadn't tried it for a long time. No, I don't believe so. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, and you know, just
That's
counts the
right.
number of impulses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can make the thing do it,
Yeah.
but you've got to be rather dexterous.
Oh yeah, fast and then the gap, fast
Yeah,
and then the
that's
gap, fast and then the gap. Yeah.
But yes, quite possible. I haven't tried it. We'll work on these. Let's try it. Yeah.
Still doesn't.
You can quote us.
We were under the impression that bypassed the coin thing too, but I don't think it would have.
No, you still had the
Still made the
electrical
connection,
thing would
yeah.
prevent you from speaking, yes.
Yeah.
Unless you screamed into the receiver, and every now and then that used to work.
Oh, okay.
Because
Yeah.
the receiver could act as a transmitter.
I think if you had no money, you could yell out and talk, and
Yeah.
you could just hear them in the background, but you had no money to put in.
We're showing our age, Ken.
You didn't put your leather belt down and make the thing.
Try and pull it.
Pennies with strings on them. Anyway, it's probably appropriate that you look at the phones then, if that's how we go, Richard.
Yes, fine.
Unless there's any further questions.
That was very good, thank you.
Thanks very much, yeah.
Yeah, you want to.